While we've all focused on the dangers of radical Islam and of Islamist terror, the attack in Norway should remind us that there is actually a pretty large problem with other sources of terrorism in the West. The European Union's 2010 Terrorism Situation and Trend Report had some fascinating findings. It showed that of the 294 terror attacks committed in Europe in 2009, only one was conducted by Islamists. That's a third of 1%. The most recent statistics show that there were 249 terror attacks in Europe in 2010. Only 3 of those attacks were carried out by Islamist terrorists. Again, that's about 1%. Most of the attacks in 2009 and 2010 were by separatist groups or anarchists. So perhaps that's the lesson we can learn from the events in Norway. Islamic radicalism is a real problem, and Islamist terrorism a real threat. But if we ignore other kinds of threats, we are likely to be blindsided by another Gabby Giffords shooting or another Virginia Tech massacre. As Norway has become the most recent nation to learn, the enemy can just as easily come from deep within.
Violent religious extremists were in the news this week, one from each side. There's a guy we found out, a Muslim soldier, a Muslim American, was planning on blowing up Fort Hood, the same place that Major Hassan shot up a couple of years ago. I don't know what they're doing down in Fort Hood, but they're making some of the Muslim soldiers mad. And then, of course, we had Anders Breivik, the guy from Norway, who did succeed in his horrible terrorist attack. Now, I'm sure the media would have no trouble calling the guy at Fort Hood a Muslim terrorist, but they refused to call Anders Breivik a Christian terrorist. But that's what he was. He's a Christian terrorist. He wanted to start a Christian onslaught against the Muslims. And it reminds me that this, this is not a problem with the Muslim religion. It's a problem with religion. And Christianity is perfectly capable of coming out of its dormant phase and once again becoming the violent, bloodlusty religion it was under the Crusades. Bill O'Reilly, and they're in just as much denial as the Muslims. Bill O'Reilly said, no one believing in Jesus commits mass murder. Pinhead, what do you think the Crusades were? What do you think the entire 16th century in Europe was? What do you think the Inquisition was? The Ku Klux Klan is a Christian organization. Tim McVeigh, I could go on. But I see that look on your face. So I will shut up.
I mean, you can call this guy a Christian extremist, but the difference between him and the Islamic supremacists that are really, this Christian guy, he's a nut who calls himself a Christian, but he isn't connected to a global terror network that is trying to perpetrate terrorism on everyone else in the name of an organized and well-funded terrorist network. No,
it's an idea.
No, that is not true. Major Hassan.
Right. It's an idea. You don't need to be in the club.
There's a difference, as we know, between Islamic supremacy and this what you're calling Christian extremism. But the reality is you're blaming this all on religion. The bloodiest murders in the last 20th century. Listen, atheism. What was communism? What was socialism? What was a great leap forward? 30 million people died in China in the Great Leap Forward. Yes. 20 million people died in Stalin's purges. That was atheism. And it was ideology run amok, and it's killed 50 million people in the 20th century. That's way more than religion.
Religion has killed
way
more
than
people
religion has killed
that is
in the
bullshit.
20th century.
And also...
But Bill, here's where I disagree with you. And I'm worried that we're on the same side on this one a little bit. But
this is very uncomfortable.
It's fanaticism.
Don't say it.
It's fanaticism that is the enemy. It is not religion. Fanaticism in any ideology and lack of tolerance is when you get danger. And that is...
But far from restraining people, religion is what gives people license to commit crazy acts. Because
so does ideology. So does what do you think Soviet communism, a great leap forward in China was? It was the same thing. It gave them license.
Didn't give them license. It gave them an army, and also. A lot of these places, it really was a state religion. North Korea, I know you would say that's an atheist country. It's not. The dear leader is the God. They think that he, when he was born, winter turned into spring. They said the first time he played golf, he had 11 holes in one. That is religion. I'm serious. You create a God. Hitler was a God.
I have another theory, by the way. maybe this guy's just batshit crazy.
Well, he is, of course. But
crazy's not
that's
an ideology.
The thing. No, but religion gives crazy a platform and justifies it. That's the problem.
No, but it is the lack of tolerance, Bill. I mean, I think that is, it is when you see a refusal to accept alternative views and you are so deeply ingrained in your own worldview that you have to stomp out everybody else, that's when you get the craziness.
But what gives people license to think that way? Religion.
Well, but many different ideologies.
But mostly religion. That's mostly what gives people the license to say, my God is a bigger dick than your God, and maybe you should die for it. Anyway, we got...
Now for our What in the World segment. What exactly is the Knights Templar? The group has come to everyone's attention because of Anders Breivik's killing spree in Norway, now just about a week ago. He claimed in his rambling manifesto to represent a modern-day Knights Templar. But who are they? The name might ring a bell, especially if you've seen the Da Vinci Code.
By a secret brotherhood, the Priory of Sion, and their military arm, the Knights Templar.
Or National Treasure.
They brought the treasure back to Europe and took the name, the Knights Templar.
Or one of any number of recent films. But these are, of course, all fictional. What are the facts? The Knights Templar was a Christian military order founded in the early 12th century. Its members were said to be elite warriors who wore distinctive white mantles with a red cross. They made their reputation by winning a series of battles in the Crusades. Ironically, the Knights' first headquarters were in a mosque, the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, because they believed it was built on the top of the ruins of Solomon's temple. Their name, Templar, comes from that legendary temple. The Knights' main job was said to be protecting Christian pilgrims from Muslims, amongst others. To this day, the site of the mosque and the Temple Mount remain one of the most heavily disputed places on earth. The Order of the Knights Templar was dissolved in 1312, but its legacy lives on. Rumors still swirl that the group exists, but in total secrecy, and guards the Holy Grail. From what sounds like fiction back to fact, we know that Breivik saw himself as a Knights Templar. But get this, halfway across the world from Norway, a new drug gang has recently arisen in Mexico. They call themselves the Knights Templar, and they claim to live by a religious code, a copy of which the Associated Press recently obtained. It says that the drug-dealing Knights will, quote, defend the values of society against materialism, injustice, and tyranny, and that its members will be honorable, noble, courteous, and honest. So they are honest drug dealers selling marijuana, cocaine, whatever, in the name of God. Anders Breivik's fascination with the Knights is less bizarre. In fact, he's part of a larger movement. People like Breivik are trying to resurrect the idea of a modern-day crusade, a real clash of civilizations against what they see as an Islamic invasion of Europe. In fact, Muslims make up only 3% of Europe's population, and that's likely to rise to between 5 and 8% by 2025 and level out at that point. But that doesn't change the reality of the anger, hatred, and the violence. Ironically, in Breivik's nostalgic view of the medieval world, Knights Templar resembles nothing so much as Al-Qaeda, another terrorist organization that is fundamentally opposed to the modern world. We still don't know if Breivik's boast that there are more lone knights like him waiting to act is true. But if his depiction of the knight as a self-sacrificing assassin on a larger holy mission sounds familiar, it is because it too is mirrored in Islamist terror. That's exactly what a suicide bomber is, a lone fighter often acting in the so-called interests of a larger movement and willing to kill innocents to draw attention to the cause. While we've all focused on the dangers of radical Islam and of Islamist terror, the attack in Norway should remind us that there is actually a pretty large problem with other sources of terrorism in the West. The European Union's 2010 Terrorism Situation and Trend Report had some fascinating findings. It showed that of the 294 terror attacks committed in Europe in 2009, only one was conducted by Islamists. That's a third of 1%. The most recent statistics show that there were 249 terror attacks in Europe in 2010. Only 3 of those attacks were carried out by Islamist terrorists. Again, that's about 1%. Most of the attacks in 2009 and 2010 were by separatist groups or anarchists. So perhaps that's the lesson we can learn from the events in Norway. Islamic radicalism is a real problem and Islamist terrorism a real threat. But if we ignore other kinds of threats, we are likely to be blindsided by another Gabby Giffords shooting or another Virginia Tech massacre. As Norway has become the most recent nation to learn, the enemy can just as easily come from deep within.